Thank you, Ken, and hello, everyone. It's an honor to be with you, to share this time with you, and kind of excited about just being with you. I know we're a little apart, but I feel really close to each one of you, and I thank you for having me. And with that said, I want to just go right into the reflection today. So, having to socially distance for people in the South, known for our hospitality, our hugs, our celebratory greeting at the meeting of a stranger, our handshakes have been extremely difficult to come to terms with. As social creatures, our personal contact and interaction is how we live, how we move and breathe. It is in our national conscience and DNA. So it's sobering to consider the things in our society that are shifting, our culture, our way of doing things. A society that runs on information and connections is shifting before our very eyes and in some ways within our hearts. As many Americans left jobless, isolated, and afraid, wonder about what will come next. While it may be a bit too early to assess the long-term effects caused by this global crisis, there are signs that things will permanently change in the way our society functions. We can already see its effect on how we work and play, how we learn and communicate, how we consume and what we value. I've said it a lot in recent weeks. This is our new normal. And although many of us are hopeful that things will return to some seemingly pre-pandemic state, there is this gnawing feeling in the back of our minds that nothing will really ever be the same again. We have marked the year 2020 as being when it all changed, when our world shifted, when we knew that we may never again have feelings of total well-being while in public spaces, when we have lost our trust in our national and local leaders for accurate and pertinent information in the time of crises. There's great anxiety in our nation about what comes next, as our national and local leaders, as early as next week, will seek to reopen parts of our country and economy. They will begin assessing what we have lost and, in some respect, reclaiming what remains. As I speak with various folks in our state and across the country, my family, friends, colleagues, and even coworkers, I am seeing a similar thread of sentiment around the uncertainty of the times, a fear of falling ill, but mostly the lamenting of the lack of social contact. It's ironic when recalling over the last decade in particular how divisive we have become. I kind of could remember that it seemed like we could barely stand each other. It seems that some might be coming to the realization that we really do need one another. If anything, we recognize that we are all in this together. And when I say that we are in it together, I certainly acknowledge the social and the economic disparities that cause some demographics in our culture to bear a heavier burden than others. I recognize that the quote unquote being in it together may mean something else to those who lack access and resources. But still, I make the assumption that everyone is dealing with some degree of anxiety and loss. I've come to the conclusion that collectively, we, our nation, and all the earth perhaps, are experiencing a type of global grief. So I wanted to take some time to address the subject of grief. We are social and innately positive creatures. I like to think that we humans are. We don't prefer to dwell in grief. In our society, grief is deemed something to avoid, but we all know it well, as it is something that we have all experienced in various forms. In fact, nobody gets out of life without experiencing grief. We can't change that. One person's reaction to loss and devastation can be so different from another's. And some have learned to embrace and accept grief as it comes, as a natural part of our stories. I've been looking at what is going on in our nation and have determined that some of it could be related to our collective grief, the anger, the acting out, the vitriol towards classes, cultures, and political persuasions may be a result of grief. And I believe that I have heard others say that grief in all its forms must be expressed in some way or another. So I was thinking about some of the protesters that were downtown, and I know that some of them may have, ulterior motives as to why they protest, but some might just be protesting out of grief, loss of business or loss of something. I've seen grief reveal itself in a beautiful act of service and memory, and I've seen it show itself in anger and destruction. It is easily recognizable in its explosive and destructive form. It will hurt or abuse those in its path. We understand that hurting people will often hurt others. But throughout millennia, people have been looking for healthy ways to express their grief. Poets and sages, songwriters and musicians have produced poignant and beautiful songs and poems of loss, of longing, and of love. Some of the greatest songs ever written were birthed out of one's deep sorrow and grief over a loss. So perhaps we should take a new look at grief, not as something to be avoided, but rather a potential source that might lead to wholeness and healing. The book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 3 tells us there's an appointed time for everything. There's a time for every event under heaven, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. So today in our global grieving, I'm encouraged to have hope. Let's make this a time that we are reminded how hearty laughter is good medicine for the soul. A time to recall that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And a time to remember that a smile can go a long way in warming a troubled heart. This pandemic is complicated and challenging. And our grief is also challenging and complicated. It comes sometimes mixed with love and sweetness that we are, or some of us get to spend quality time with our loved ones. And I'm thinking of you, Sue. But it also comes with intense sadness because some of us have lost so much. Someone said that grief is but love with no place to go. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corners of your eyes, in the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part in your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. Author Martin Prechtel, in his book entitled The Smell of Rain on Dust, offers a new possibility. He introduces grief as a high form of praise. He conveys that grief should be demonstrably expressed as a process of wholeness and healing. He states, grief expressed out loud, whether in or out of character, unchoreographed and honest, for someone we have lost, or a country or a home we have lost, is in itself the greatest praise we could ever give them. Grief is praise because it is the natural way love honors what it misses, end quote. And I would add that it is also a way love pre-honors what it expects to lose or knows it may lose due to the uncertainty of tomorrow. This is an anticipatory grief. Now, on the subject of those we lose to death, Prechtel states, our own souls who have loved and are now heartbroken would turn to stone and hate us if we did not show such praise when we lose whom we love. A non-fake grieving is how we praise the dead, by praising that which left us feeling cold and left behind. By the event of our uncontrolled grief, wail, and rap, we are also simultaneously praising with all of our hearts the life we have been awarded to live, the life that gave us the health and the opportunity of having lived fully enough to love deep enough to feel the loss we now grieve. To not grieve is a violence to the divine and our own hearts, and especially to the dead. If we do not grieve what we miss, we are not praising what we love. We are not praising the life we have been given in order to love. If we do not praise whom we miss, we are ourselves in some way dead. So grief and praise make us alive, end quote. Here in my home and wherever you are, I'm encouraging us to recognize and accept our grief and then allow it to become our act of praise. Our healing is realized with our acceptance. Acceptance, by the way, is the final stage in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Now, I am professionally and personally a practitioner of the acceptance commitment therapy. It's an emotional health psychotherapy in which acceptance is a key part. Acceptance here is allowing unwanted private experiences, thoughts, feelings, and urges to come and go without struggling with them. Our acceptance can start as a validation of our own feelings, concerns, worries, and fears, while also validating what others might be feeling. And we don't say that we affirm the behavior one exhibits as a result of the grief they're expressing, but we recognize that their grief is real in whatever form it manifests. I'm reminded of the serenity prayer that reads, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Acceptance enables us to be present in the moment, allowing us to feel what we are feeling, to express what we feel, and to grieve what we now miss. Our grieving of what was, and then to some degree, our letting go of what may not ever be again, allows us to move forward in hope of what is possible. We get to make new meaning and create new possibilities for a brighter and productive future together. As we consider this reflection today in light of all that is going on in our world, your world, and if you are willing to share, I present a few questions for your consideration. What other things do we have the potential of losing? What things might we gain individually, collectively, and globally? How do you see you and your family changing or not as a result of this crisis? How do you feel that our nation's people and leaders have handled the crisis? Do you feel that this crisis have been overblown and will not have a lasting effect on our nation? And if so, why? And finally, what is your hope? What might you envision for us going forward? I'll end with a quote from Susanna Arundhati Roy. Susanna Arundhati Roy. She writes, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine the world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So be it. Amen.